Well, good morning again, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for coming along. And now for something completely different. No, it's not. We were asked to put together some extra talks due to circumstances, and we've cobbled together this one here. It's a bit of a, as I say, it's a memory, meanderings. Some of it is based on questions that have been asked of us, and we're trying to put some answers together and explain a little bit more about a few things. Briefly, I left home at the age of 15 and left a small village in Scotland and went down to work at London Airport. And I think that I've got an inquiring mind. And when I went to Papua New Guinea, or when we went to Papua New Guinea, I was just sucking all this stuff in, all this new stuff in, and I was trying to be as observant as possible as well. So a lot of what I'm going to show you in this first lot are my observations of things that I hope you'll appreciate, and you'll be quite bemused by the fact that Papua New Guinea is over 70,000 years old with human habitation. And there's no written language, no metal, no wheels, none of that stuff. It's all what we would term primitive. But when you see what comes up here, you'll see that they were far from being primitive people. They do things there that we would never, ever even contemplate doing. When we came down from Papua New Guinea, this is just a collection of our artifacts, and we realized very, very quickly that all the artifacts, we never bought any artifacts, we were given a lot of things. We knew quite early on that we wouldn't be able to look after them. So this is on a wall in our house that we had in Adelaide for a short period of time. And then we moved up to Darwin, and I took probably 90% of my artifacts that we had, and I donated them to the Darwin Museum. And we were in Darwin a couple of years ago, and we actually went back into the vaults and had a look at the collection. And we're very pleased to see that it was being well looked after. And we were also able to get some photographs of the things that we hadn't bothered taking photographs of in the past, but you will have seen the shield and the tapa cloth in one of the other presentations. But one of the things that we hung on to was this drum. And when I was given the drum without the skin, and that's a huge, the drum head is probably nearly 12 inches across diameter, and I was given the drum with no skin on it. And we went into this village on patrol, and I was carrying this skinless drum, and this gentleman here, he said, "Oh, I've got a skin." And he brought out this huge lizard skin. That's what is on there. And he said, "I'll put it on the drum for you." And he disappeared into the bush with an empty can. Came back probably 20 minutes later, and the bottom of the can had this red liquid in it. And he smeared the red liquid around the top of the drum. Then he got the skin and laid it across, and then he got some bamboo, wound that round, and he beat it down, wound some more bamboo, and he beat it down. That's what he's doing on the right-hand image. He's actually beating this bamboo down to tighten the skin on the drum. And he said, leave it on the drum for the bamboo on the drum for a couple of weeks, and then you can take it off and it'll be okay. Now, it's 50 years ago that was done. It's still perfectly all right. I'd like to go back and find out what this glue was that he used, have it analysed, and I'll make a fortune. But it wasn't like a glue like super glue or anything like that. It was amazing liquid. And those six little dots in the centre bottom image, they're actually beeswax from stingless bees, and they use that to tune the drum. before they go off to play the drum, they'll heat the skin on a bit of fire, and that'll tighten the skin up. And then they just squeeze that wax, and it changes the pitch of the drum. Quite amazing. And then they beat it and play it. So that's just an example of the sort of thing that they do. And obviously this has been developed over thousands of years doing these sorts of things. The carving on that drum is amazing as well. And it was all done with shells as the cutting tool. But this is what they call a huli pick on the right. And that's the fighting weapon that they use in the wig men and the yellow faces. And the tip of the pick, the bottom left image there is the tip of that, is actually the toenail of the cassowary, or one of the toenails of the cassowary. So you get 6 picks out of one cassowary. And you can see the binding at the top. So the first thing they have to do is find a branch that's shaped like that, because they can't use a straight handle, it's got to have a curve in it. And then they bind the other piece on with the head. And you can see the weaving on the bottom image there. That's bamboo that's been woven as like a collet, and they put it on wet. Now as it dries, it shrinks and holds fast the tip of the pick. And I'll show you why and how they actually use these things. Remember, day before yesterday, I talked about the delineation in the highlands. They dig these huge trenches between the land. Well, they dig them big enough so that to actually get across them, you can't jump across them. You'd have to fell a tree to cross the ditch. And generally, that's very bad to try and invade somebody over one log. So they try and sneak in at night time and the like, but most of the battles or the fights, the tribal fights, took place inside the ditch. And most of it was being chased. You were chased or being chased. And this pick, the shape of the pick, is designed as a defensive weapon, not an offensive weapon, because when you're running down this trench with your enemy behind you, and the only thing that he's got to do is to maybe stab you with a knife or prod you with an arrow or whatever, he can't get a shot off at you, is to get that pick, hold the handle, and throw it behind you. As the person's coming up behind you, you throw it behind you, and it impales in the soft belly of the enemy. That's how that weapon is used. It's not used to stab down, it's used to thrust up. And this is the sort of thing that would have happened. This is what is called a huli charge. Occasionally they had shields, very, very rare to see a shield. But this is what would have happened down these trenches. You would have had all these people charging around after you. I was at it was just a big gathering on the patrol post that we were at, and I got my camera and lay down and said, okay guys, go for it. And this is what happened. They never realized they'd be on a ship in the off the West African coast. But that's the way that they would fight there, and it's just all noise, bluster. First person gets injured, first blood is drawn, everything stops because somebody is beaten the other side. They try not to kill people. More handicrafts here. The lady on the left is making a bill, and Morag referred to them in her presentation. Now, all of that material that is used there's coconut fronds that she's using to base the weaving on, but all of that string is all made from natural materials. They don't go down the shop and buy wool or machine-made string. And this guy on the right, this is the same bloke that put the skin on the drum. He's actually using an old piece of spring steel that he'd found to use to carve out that bowl. But they turn their hand to everything and anything. Again, this is a finished billum, but look at the intricate weaving that they've done in that basket there. Now that's all natural materials, and these baskets generally come from a place one place in the Highlands that does very good baskets, but most of the best baskets, like this one on the right here, come from an island called Booker, which is off Bougainville. And they're commonly known as Booker baskets. But to develop the skills to be able to make all of this without any instructions, without any previous knowledge, I think it's quite amazing. And they obviously teach the kids, and it moves up over time. But this is the shield that I told you about earlier. And you can't see it, but there are actually 2 arrowheads stuck in the shield. Now that shield is probably maybe it's about that big hanging off the wall. And what they do is they carry it over a shoulder. They have their bow and arrow in this hand, and they carry the shield over their shoulder. And they'll shoot an arrow, and then they'll turn and crouch down, and they could just about hide completely behind that shield. With the tapa cloth, that's the one that they used in the dancing, but in the same area, they actually developed a tapa cloth which was quite thick. Might have been about an inch thick in woven cloth. And then they'd have 7 or 8 pieces of this, which they would hang around their shoulders. And when they were fighting, if they saw an arrow coming towards them, they would just spin. And this tapa cloth, all these layers of tapa cloth would spin out. And just the movement of that tapa cloth and the arrow hitting that would actually deflect the arrow elsewhere. It's quite amazing stuff that they developed. But one of the things that really, again, it's just with an open, inquiring mind, you see these things and you wonder, how on earth did they do them? These axes, this axe on the club on the left here, I was just given the stone. It was a river stone, really, really hard, but somehow they'd managed to cut a hole right through the middle of it. I don't know how they did it. They don't know how they did it, because that club head's probably about 400 years old. But I got the club, and I gave it to one of the guys, and I said, yeah, I'll put a handle on that. And off he went, and back came the handle. I'll show you a little bit how he did it later on. But on the right-hand side, this is an axe from Warbag, and these stones, the stone is found in rivers near the coast, and it's brought up into the Highlands, traded with the shells and the dog's teeth and everything else. And then they'd just sit at night time or whenever and just rub the stone on a harder stone, and it might take 3 or 4 years to actually carve that stone into the shape of an axe head. Patience just to be able to do that, and it is very, very sharp. But here's the work that went into putting that club head on. And as you can see, the collets that they've made out of the bamboo, just to be able to strip the bamboo, weave the bamboo, and put it on, and have that on there so that the head doesn't come off. You know, it's just mind-boggling with the dexterity that these people have. And this particular axe head also, there are 3 lots of weaving on here. Different types of material have been used. I say, I was just amazed at actually the way they did things. These 2 club heads are really ancient. Nobody can remember anybody making these. These have been found in the mud when they've been digging their gardens. They've turned these things over. And they've come from a race of people that have long gone, and that use this type of club head. And you would think that they'd used some sort of metal to actually cut the stone. But what they've actually used is the tail of in a stingray, and it's got the barb that pops up? Well, they've used that as a file. And that's how they've actually carved into the rock. And those tails are traded from the coast up into the Highlands for them to make these things. And they spend an inordinate amount of time making these weapons. You can see the carving that's gone into making these arrow heads, just the arrows themselves, but they're tipped. The right-hand image here, they're tipped with bones from possums and wallabies. They're hollow bones, and they're fitted onto the end of the arrowhead, and these are actually arrows are used for hunting pigs. They don't use them for warfare, and the general idea is that they find a pig somewhere, and if they're lucky enough to get a shot off at it, that penetrates the pig, and the arrow falls out. And eventually the pig bleeds, doesn't necessarily bleed to death, but it bleeds, and that allows the dogs that they've got to actually follow the scent of the pig, to track the pig down. So they've used a bit of grey matter to be able to work out how to use these different things to survive. But just the intricacy in the carving and everything else. Imagine them sitting around the fire at night time telling stories, giving an education to the kids and everything, and just carving away with a bit of shell, that no metal at all, to make all of these things. This particular arrowhead is actually used for fighting, for warfare. And on the right-hand image, you can just about see it. That's made from black palm. It's the same material that they use to make the floors of the houses. And it's very, very strong from a tensile point of view. But what they do is they put grooves in the arrowhead, and when they know they're going off and having a bit of a set-to with their friendly neighbours, they'll actually dip that arrowhead in a bit of excreta before they go out. Or if they're in the region where that poisonous bird was, then they'll rub the bird on the feathers on the end of the arrow. But that is not an arrow that is used to kill and penetrate a vital organ. If it does, they're just very, very lucky. Generally, the weight of the bamboo that the arrow is made of, when it penetrates the target, the weight of the arrow will actually move up and down. So basically, when that tip goes into a body, it works a bit like a dum-dum bullet inside. It just carves away at the flesh inside the body, and obviously, with it being very dirty, and the tips tend to break and splinter, you then end up with septicemia, and the person that it hits dies 2 or 3 days later. So that's a man-killing arrow. This, again, is another pig-killing arrow, but it's made with bamboo, and if you can imagine, they use bamboo. When they split bamboo, it's very, very sharp. They can use it for shaving, for cutting hair, for cutting up pigs and the like. And this particular arrowhead, you see the intricate designs and painting on it. They've spent a lot of time making these things. The tip of the arrowhead is at the join. The bamboo is in segments, and the tip of it is at one of these joins where it's really, really strong. But just look at the intricacy on the right-hand image. All of that string that is used to tie the arrowhead onto the shaft is all handmade. And it's fine, really, it's like cotton, basically. But they've actually woven that, and you can actually see in the image there that where they've actually woven 2 pieces together. And it's just, as I say, I'm blown away with looking at this stuff and seeing how the dexterity that they needed to do this is just amazing. When I was on Manham Island, I went into one of the men's houses, and I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. I was given this bowl, and it was sat in the men's house on a shelf. And this guy, the village chief, came up to me and he said, "Yeah, you can have this as a gift." I thought, "Oh, that's nice of you." And he then sat down with me and he went through a genealogy of the owners of this bowl, from him back in time. And it was probably somewhere between 350 and 400 years old from the person that made this bowl. And that was carved using seashells to carve the wood itself. The edges there with those nicks in them, that again was the tail from a stingray file. The shark skin is very, very rough, and they use that as like a sandpaper. And down the bottom here, we actually asked them to make us some serviette rings from these rings. Generally, they're a lot bigger, and they put them right up on their arms or their legs. And I said, oh, let's just make some small ones so that we can have some serviette rings. And that was all done from split bamboo. Can anybody tell me what the image at the top is? Got a rough idea what that might be? Yes, it's a pillow. And this comes from the Sepik area. You can see the masked faces there. And they'll make those, and they just rest the back of their head on the pillow there. And that below is a comb, obviously, for their fuzzy hair. A couple more. This long nose, that's from the Manam Island area. There's a group of islands off Wewak called it's just left me. This second image in, and that's made from paraffin wood. And they're really, really beautiful carvings that they do from there. And again, no metal tools or anything that's used. On this, there's a spoon here. The coconut shell in the bottom of that spoon was probably about that big, so it's a huge spoon. And here we've got a knife that's made from cassowary femur. And this is how long the knife is, over 30 centimetres. Now, part of my job, and every other patrol officer's job, was to find people that had these knives and to actually not confiscate them, but we would deliberately break the tips off them so that they couldn't be used as an offensive weapon. So if you go to Papua New Guinea today and you see a muruk, muruk means cassowary, a cassowary dagger, you shouldn't find one with a sharp point on the end because they've just stopped making them. And what they've done in the huli area, remember I showed you this image of with the huli with all these feathered wigs and everything? Well, that's his cassowary knife there. And what they've done in that area, where you've got on the far left of the image there where they've started shaping the knife, what they've done up in this particular area is they've started that a lot further down. So they've got probably 3 inches or 4 inches of the knuckle end still intact before they started shaping it. And the reason for that is that they don't have any pockets. So when they started getting banknotes, they'd roll those up and push them up inside the bone, and that's their wallet. Now, that knife is an indication to everybody that this is an initiated man. And again, the Hulis are a different kind of people to a lot of the rest of Papua New Guinea, in that they're not afraid to stand up to people. And just a quick aside on this one, I was in the office one day and I heard this big hullabaloo going on, and I ran across to the main office to find out what had happened. And when the Hulis are in discussion with you, they'll puff their chests out and they'll be quite aggressive in their features. But what they do instinctively, because this cassowary bone dagger is in their belt, instinctively they hold the dagger. And this is a sign, they're not going to stab anybody with it, but this is a sign that we're not going to take anything from you, we mean business. And they held this. Now, what happened is a patrol officer that had just come in to our area, he knew nothing about the people, he knew nothing about their habits and their demeanour, was having a real set-to and a real argument with these guys. And he was on the desk, on the other side of the desk, and next to him was a rack of jungle carbines, 303 jungle carbines, which is basically a sawn-down 303 rifle. And these jungle carbines had a brass butt on them. So this guy was standing there arguing with him, and he grabbed hold of his knife and moved forward like that and said, "Don't you tell me what I can and can't do." And the patrol officer on the other side of the desk jumped up, grabbed one of these jungle carbines, and went whack right in the middle of his forehead with this brass butt. Split his skin open completely. Obviously, blood pouring everywhere. And this started the whole fracas going on. I heard this and I ran across from the council office that I was working in. Saw the bloke with all the blood pouring down his face. The patrol officer is still standing there with the gun. So I got this guy's brother, and the office was right next door to the main airstrip, and it was taboo for anybody to walk across the airstrip. So I got this guy's brother, and I got him to hold his split skin together, and I told the two of them to walk straight across the airstrip. I knew there was no aircraft coming, and that they could get straight across to the hospital on the other side to get stitched up. So off they went, but as soon as they went out the office, everybody else could see this bloke had blood pouring down his face, and they were all yelling in language that the patrol officer had hit and beaten them up. I get the patrol officer and I took him down the other end of the office and put him in a little room to make him safe. And then I went outside. The unfortunate thing was it was payday Thursday. So everybody had got their wages and everybody had gone down to the local trade store. Not everybody, but most of the men, and gone down to the local trade store, and they'd bought cartons of beer. And the cartons of beer were at about 28 degrees, I think. So they were all drinking this hot, not warm, but hot beer. And they were getting kind of merry very quickly. And a whole group, there would have probably been about 400 of these hoolies, all came up to the office, and they were baying for this other patrol officer's blood. And I knew most of the people in the front row, basically. So I just stood my ground and I told them, no, look, he's gone to the hospital. The patrol officer's being held in the office there. I'll speak to head office and we'll take it all to court, and the court will sort out what's going on. Up behind me on the veranda was the senior sergeant with his truncheon. And he was basically saying, "Come on, I'll fight the lot of you." And I'm saying, no, don't. Stay away, stay away. So after about probably 20 minutes of negotiation with this huge crowd, they all dispersed and off they went away. And that's the reason for that is because I respected them, they respected me. When I said this was going to happen, they believed it was going to happen. So I said, we're going to take this guy to court and it'll get sorted out in court. The patrol officer, just after the guys had crossed to go to the hospital, a short takeoff and landing aeroplane called a Twin Otter. It came in and it was full of fuel. And this guy was in the office and they were offloading all these drums of fuel. And I said to the pilot, I want to get this bloke onto that plane and away instantly. So I had to go into radio through to head office, give them a quick brief on what was happening. And they said, okay, he's allowed to get onto this plane. This plane was empty, except for the pilot. So we drove the utility vehicle round to the back doors, opened the door, he jumped out into the back of the utility. I drove up the airstrip, he climbed onto the roof of the utility. The pilot had the engines going and everything working. He put the brakes on, walked up to the back of the aircraft, opened the door. Patrol officer jumped in, he shut the door, and he was off the ground inside probably 50 feet. This Twin Otter just went like that, amazing takeoff. I then had to rescue the patrol officer's horses, goats, his whole menagerie, and put a police guard on it because I was just expecting all these hoolies to go up to his house and rob him blind of everything that was there. We left Tari probably 6 months after that. He never came back to the patrol post. I don't know how he got all his gear, but I've got no idea what happened. But we actually had left Tari by that time. But that's just a little aside about things weren't always stickety-boo in Papua New Guinea. Because there's no written language, I hope you can see this. This is what they call a storyboard. And a lot of coastal areas, they make these in the Sea Pic and in the Trobriand Islands and the like in Papua. They tell all these stories, and this is a story about a crocodile eating somebody, and a whole lot of images in there are being carved to show traditional dress and everything else. And this would be in the house. So basically, that's their photo album that they've created themselves. It's unfortunate that it's not a better image, but if you want to come and see me later, you can actually look at it on the computer. It's probably a better image than that there. But one of the other things that really intrigued me was the use of these slit gongs. These are huge wooden drums. They've got a slit in them, and they beat them with another stick. And this particular place, I think they got seven or eight slit gongs in here. Now, that's on Manam Island. Now, they don't grow trees that big on Manam Island. So what's happened is that trees have fallen into the Sea Pic or the Ramu River. They've been washed down, gone into the ocean, and eventually landed on the shore of the island. And they've got them and carved the drums out of them. Very, very big drums. Now, I've been on Manam Island when they've had a bit of a party in this men's house, and they've been beating these drums, and Manam Island's 13 miles offshore. You can hear these drums beating on the mainland, and it's just an amazing sign. But the carvings and everything in that is spectacular. This is the house that little bowl came out of. This is a typical residence on the coast. The building at the back is the kitchen. So if there ends up being a fire, it doesn't burn the whole house down, it just burns the kitchen down. But that's typical of that there. But this house, when I told you about the culture on Manam Island with the paramount chief, that's his house. He's probably got 6 or 7 wives in there, but that huge house is the paramount chief's house. And just on the other side of the house, there was actually looked more like a brewery rubbish dump, because every time the coconut guy would send the coconuts down to Madang, he'd bring a boat full of beer back, and obviously he had to give a whole pile of the beer to the chief, and he'd just sit on the veranda drinking beer and throwing these bottles over the side. So I dare say in a few 100 years' time, when the archaeologists are going around there, they wonder how he managed to set up his own bottling plant. But this is the chief's house is on the right, and that's the men's house on the left. And you can just about make out on that leading pole at the front there are the same masks they carve right up the pole of the house, just to decorate the whole thing. And as I say, there's not a nail in there at all. It's all done with bush rope and everything, tying it all together. Up in the Highlands in Tep Tep, and this particular house that really amazed me, because it's almost like an igloo. The walls on that are probably 2 meters, maybe even 3 meters thick. And that one small entrance there that you can see, you have to bend right down to get in and walk through it. And you've got maybe, as I say, 3 meters of grass. It's all made of grass. And inside there were 3 rooms. And they were all elevated. So on that platform, you climb up on the platform, and in the middle of each of those platforms, there was a fireplace. And what they've done is they've built the platform, And then in the middle of the platform, they've sunk down and put another cradle of wood. Then they've filled that with rocks, and then they've put clay on the top of the rocks, and then that's where they light the fire. So the fire doesn't actually impact on any of the timber around the place. It's quite safe. But what happens when the fire's on, the heat goes through the clay into the rocks, and at night time that heat just radiates through the building. So they've got their own air conditioning, on underfloor heating in these particular buildings. The roofs of the inside roofs of the buildings are just thick of tar from the soot and the smoke from the fires. They've just lined the inside of the house with tar, which is waterproof the inside of the house. But intermittently in there and right up in the roof, they've placed little bamboo poles that stick out. So the smoke has got some way to actually, like little chimneys. There are probably 20 or 30 little chimneys in the grass there. So just, how they come up with building these things is just absolutely amazing. This is a men's house in this particular area in Tari where we were. The men lived in one house and the women lived in another. But they were all built very much the same. So we've got, these houses are very low, but what they've done is they've dug down maybe 1 metre into the ground, and that's actually dropped the walls right down, so it keeps the heat, retains the heat inside the building, inside the house. And it's just a grass roof and everything like that. And it has its fallbacks, because when we were doing the changing of the money from dollars and cents to Kina and Toya, one poor bloke was in his house there, and he had kept all of his money, his coins, secretly hid it in the grass in the roof of the house. And unfortunately, the house burnt down. And this is what he brought to me to exchange for new money. And I said, well, I'm terribly sorry. I don't think I can give you anything for that. But what I'll do is, as a gesture, I had a look at some 20-cent pieces and 10-cent pieces in there. I did a rough calculation in there, and I gave the guy 5 kina anyway for that. He wouldn't have had anything. So we've got that at home now as a keepsake of Papua New Guinea. But in that area with these little squat houses, they set up a living museum, and they built this. Now that completely astounded all of the people there. Now, what on earth are you building? Why are you building this? This particular house structure was from the ancient people. What's happened is that the Hoolies, these Wigmen, originate from way over a mountain range, and they've overpopulated, and they've decided to go off and conquer, and they've gone into this valley, and this is where these style of houses were. And the people that lived in this valley were quite meek and mild farmer types. They've found mortars and pestles in there. They've found everything. Papua New Guinea is the oldest living agriculture in the world, well over 10,000 years old, that they've actually been practicing agriculture, far older than Babylon or the Middle East. So the Hoolies invaded here, and those pineapple-shaped clubs that I showed you, they're from this area. So anyway, the Hoolies have invaded, kicked all those people out, and built the houses that they brought from their home, the type of houses that they were used to living in. They've brought them in here and supplanted this particular type of house. This is that huge house in Basavi. Now, they forward planned to build that sort of a house because they need very, very long poles. They need 6 long poles to actually form the centre of the house. What they do is they're called swithin gardeners. Swithin gardening means that you have an area of jungle. You go down and you clear out all of the undergrowth, cut anything down that's spindly. You get your bananas, your breadfruit, your pawpaws, yams, any kind of food that you want to grow. You plant all the little suckers and everything in there. Then you get your axe out and you cut down all the trees, and they just fall down on top of whatever it is that you're planting. That's swithin gardening. So all those trees decay and provide the sustenance to grow whatever it is they're going to eat. When they do that, they actually make sure that they plant trees in a line next to this garden, because they'll cut the garden. They're not going to use that garden for probably 10 years. They prepare so far in advance. And they plant the trees next to where the garden is, and then they'll go back 10 years later. These trees have grown up. The vegetables and crops and everything have flourished. And then they'll dismantle this house and take it, or most of the timber anyway, from this house over to the new one, and they'll build a new house from these 6 trees that they've planted to form the centre row. Now, the women live in the outside edges. Down either edge are like small rooms that the women live in, the mothers and the children, and in the centre of the house is where the men live. Now, right through the centre of the house is quite wide, but on either side of this centre is a raised bed, and that raised bed has got 2 sleeping spots and a fire pit. You know, I explained how they make the fire pit. And a fire pit, 2 sleeping spots, fire pit, so on. So right down both sides of the inside of the house. And it just, as I say, it's just amazing when you go and see these things. One of the biggest problems that they had in Papua New Guinea was when the missionaries turned up. This is a generalisation. They told everybody that they had to cover their nakedness and encourage them to wear some sort of clothes. And unfortunately, when you're lying next to a lit fire on a wooden floor and you roll towards the fire, if you're naked, you feel the heat fairly quickly and you move away. Subconsciously, you just roll away. If you've got a nylon t-shirt or a dress or blouse or whatever, and you roll towards it, you don't feel the heat until it's too late. And the number of people in Papua New Guinea who have got huge burn scars on their arms simply by rolling into the fire at night time. One of the other things is that also that a lot of the clothes that were provided were made of wool and the like, and they'd go out and get wet. And of course, they'd go home and they were told to keep their nakedness covered. And what happens? They end up getting pneumonia. So we end up with a lot of injuries from rolling into fires and a lot of deaths from people getting pneumonia from covering themselves. Obviously, these guys haven't heard the word, but that's only because we just arrived. This is me going off to get a prefabricated wall. We just send a message out, so you want a piece of woven bamboo this size, and 3 or 4 days later you'll get a message back saying it's ready, come and pick it up. So we go and pick up these walls of bamboo and just nail them up, put a bit of timber around the edges to keep them up. But you couldn't even drive a truck through that, it's so strong. But modern architecture, this is a lodge up in the Highlands, very famous for bird watchers. A lot of bird watchers go there every year, at particular times of the year, to go and see birds of paradise and other birds coming through. But that's a beautiful setting, and they're traditional roundhouses from the Highlands. So we've done a bit of artifacts and we've done a bit of architecture. Now we'll do planes, boats and cars and everything else. This is a typical aircraft that used to fly in and out, Britain-Norman Islander. Unfortunately, the specifications that they were told in the book didn't necessarily match the conditions in Papua New Guinea. And I was in that aircraft going off the Como airstrip, and We had to go and stand on weighing scales. Whatever we had, we weighed ourselves, we weighed our cargo, we weighed the pigs, we weighed everything. And the pilot would sit down and he'd tot up exactly what, when he got to the point where he'd gotten too much weight, things were not allowed on the plane. So he'd go around to the other side and get in. Unfortunately, when I got on this plane, somebody else had thrown a few more bags of sweet potatoes in the back of the plane without the pilot seeing. So we got to the end of the airstrip, he opened up the throttle, and we got probably 2/3 of the way down the airstrip, and he said to me, I was in the front with him, he said, "This doesn't feel too good. There's too much weight in here." And I said, "Well, we can't stop." And so he nudged the throttles forward a little bit, and we went right off the end of the runway, and it was probably maybe 50 feet at the end of the runway. And when you see the aircraft going off aircraft carriers, they fly off and drop down and then go up. That's exactly what happened, thank God, on that one there. And he didn't like flying those aeroplanes. Same pilot was there, and he came in one day and it got dark and not allowed to fly in the dark. And he said, "Okay, well, I'm going to take off." But he said to Morag, "Go up to the radio and radio through to Madang, air traffic control, and let them know that my radio's packed in and I left 10 minutes ago." So she had to go in and radio up Madang and let them know that he'd taken off 10 minutes earlier than he actually did. Fortunately, it was pitch black when he got back to where he was going, but he knew exactly where he was. They had some lights and he was able to land without too much trouble. This is a typical aircraft. When Morag was having Craig, I went into the head office to do a bit of work. And one of the jobs I had to do was to go around all the different outstations and take the money out for the treasury to pay the wages and everything. And we went out, took some fuel out in this particular plane, again out to Como, and there was just me, the pilot, plane full of fuel. We arrived, they offloaded the fuel, and the fuel had actually been tied down with cargo nets. So I went to the council office, and we had a generator there that had packed it in. So I thought, well, we'll take that in for maintenance. So they brought that and put that in the back end of the plane, right at the back. And we're just about getting ready to take off, and the 8-post orderly, suppose a nurse, came rushing across and said, hey, this lady's got breech birth, and she's going to die if we don't get her to hospital. The nearest hospital is a 15-minute flight away. We had no seats, nothing. So this lady and her mother came along. We put them in the back of the plane. We threw the cargo net over them and tied the cargo net down so that the women wouldn't move around in the back of the plane. And basically we were up, 10 minutes down, and we were able to get this lady into hospital, and she and the baby survived. When we left there, because we'd taken that amount of time to load her up and get her off at the other end, there's a place called the Tari Gap, and if you go into this gap, when you go into the gap, it looks perfectly clear, but on the other end of the gap, it could be clouded in completely. If you do that, you've got to have God on your side, because you can't turn round inside the gap. So we'd taken off, we went up into the gap, sure enough, turned the corner, cloud everywhere. Couldn't see a damn thing, and we couldn't turn round. The pilot looked up and he just saw this little blue patch of sky, and off we went. And we went up to probably about 13,000 feet just to get out through this hole in the clouds. And then we got up there, and then we could come down to fly along the top of the cloud level, which was about 10,000 feet. And we got up there, and I thought, oh, thanks for that. At that time, I used to smoke, and so did the pilot. So I thought, well, we got up there, and I thought, well, let's light up a cigarette. So I got the cigarette out, and the two of us there going, what's that strange smell? And because we'd gone up like that, this generator in the back had slid backwards. What the guys in Como hadn't done was actually emptied it. So we had the back end of the plane had probably half a gallon of fuel, petrol, sloshing around on the floor in the back of the plane. And there was me just about ready to light a cigarette. So these planes have got little like quarter windows at the front. So we hurriedly lit them, and we had to wait for our smoke until we got to the other end and try and clear this. There's no way you could open the door and let the breeze through. But that's just a little tale about that sort of thing. This is Mission Aviation Fellowship. They're the missionaries that fly around delivering stuff, stores and everything. There's a lady in the hospital was due to have when you eat uncooked pork, especially up in Papua New Guinea, you can get what's called pig bell. It's a gangrene of the intestine. And what happens, all the white corpuscles in your body go crazy and you swell up. Your belly swells up, your arms and everything swell up. And this lady was pregnant, very pregnant, and she had pig bell. So the doctor decided that what he was going to do was operate on her, excise the gangrenous intestine, sew it all up, let her rest, and then she could have a baby. But the last time the plane was bringing the oxygen and the nitrous oxide or whatever it is, sleeping gas and everything else, to Tari, it was clouded in. So we had to take it to the nearest airstrip, which was Como, where we used to live. And there was no planes around except for a Mission Aviation Fellowship plane. And I said to him, look, we need to get this oxygen in for the hospital. He said, well, I can't do anything unless I get paid for it. I thought, oh, okay, not a problem. So I went in and raided the office drawer and got $70 to pay for him to fly over, pick up this gas and bring it back to Tari. So I threw those bottles in the back of the truck and took them to the hospital. And I thought, oh, I've never seen an operation before. I'm going to have a peek at this pig bell operation. So the lady was there. She was anesthetized, and they're cleaning her all up and everything. And I'm looking through a gap in the door, watching what was going on. And the doctor, there's two Filipino doctors, both surgeons, both very, very good doctors, excellent doctors. And he made his incision on the belly to open her up to get to the intestines. And what was in front of him? A near-term ectopic pregnancy. You ladies know what that is. Men probably haven't got a clue. But there's this child had developed outside of the uterus. And he saw this, and then I watched him. He got his scalpel out, and he just went like that. There's a bit of liver, fallopian tubes, bit of whatever came off. He handed the baby to his wife, and she went off to look after the baby. And then he jumped inside and found this gangrenous intestine, chopped that out very quickly, sewed it all up, put her back together again, and she survived. The baby survived. I had the task of speaking to the parents about 5-6 days later to counsel this lady that she had to go and have a hysterectomy because the likelihood was that she would have another ectopic pregnancy and end up dying. Unfortunately for them, the baby was a girl. They would really love to have had a boy, but still both survived. So I then went through the whole process of educating this couple in modern Western medicine, and fortunately they had killed pigs, so they knew what happened inside a pig, and all I was doing was interpreting an act to say this is basically the same as what you've got inside a human being. You're going to have these things removed. And sure enough, off they went and did that. Back to something a little less meandering. This bridge was made from Marsden matting, which is the metal matting that they used during the war to make airstrips. and they'd made the airstrip at Sidor and had a lot left over, so they actually joined it all together and made the bridge. Now this is Morag and Craig. We went down to Ley to pick up this vehicle as a standard Toyota vehicle, but what they normally did was inside that canvas cover there, they'll actually put chicken wire inside to stop people getting in, stealing stuff from the vehicle or whatever. So it'd actually be, not only did it have the canvas cover, but also was enclosed in chicken wire. We sold a government vehicle to an enterprising young man who wanted to do a car hire business. And he decided to find his fuel from wherever he could get it. And remember I told you about taking the rubber rings off the 44-gallon drums and the water getting in? Well, he was driving up a very, very steep hill, and the engine packed in because there was water in the tank and dirt and everything else in the tank. And it happened a number of times, so he knew what to do, was to take out the filter and the fuel filter and everything. But he was parked on a hill like this. In the back of the truck was full of women and kids. And his brother was sitting in the driver's seat, and he was under the bonnet. And he yelled out to his brother, who had his foot on the brake, "Can you do something," whatever it was. And his brother opened the door and stepped out of the car. The car went backwards down this hill, very, very steep hill, into a ravine. That happened at probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Around about midnight, I get a knock on the door from my council clerk, who had broken his femur, and he was in plaster from his hip to his toe, and he'd struggled from his house down to where we were to tell us there'd been a car accident. So I jumped in that and drove out. So we got out to where this car accident was at about 2 o'clock in the morning, to be met by all these stretcher beds that were made from bush materials and a whole lot of flaming torches. There were 4 women and 3 kids, all deceased, all laid out on these things. And it reminded me of the snake. I just had no idea how to test. I tested for pulses, couldn't find pulses. Checked for dilated pupils. They've all got brown eyes. It was dark. I felt the skin. All these torches were radiating heat onto the bodies. I had no idea. So anyway, unceremoniously, we put the 7 bodies into the back of that vehicle and drove them to the hospital, backed them up to the back of the hospital. The doctor knew we were coming. And as we took the bodies out of the back, he instantly told me why these people had died. Various reasons, with femoral arteries being punctured by sticks, and one lady had tried to climb out the back of the truck when it hit the ground and basically split in half. So that was the sort of thing that we got up to as patrol officers, just to show you it wasn't all beer and skittles in Papua New Guinea. But this is the sort of road that we drove at. That vehicle was the first vehicle to actually drive through the Tari Gap and along this road. This road was constructed, a lot of it was constructed by the Australian Army engineers. They developed a kind of plastic to go across the swampy areas called terra firma. And that's the sort of terrain that they were building roads through, and I had to drive through. When I went through there, they just cut down a lot of trees, split them up, and made like corrugated timber track that we drove through. But they were my meanderings, ladies and gentlemen. This is my penultimate presentation. I should be back in a couple of days' time for something else. We've really, really enjoyed meeting with you and making the presentations, and we'll have probably a week of rest and recuperation before we get to Southampton, so we'd be more than happy to catch up with any of you at any time for another chat, because we obviously haven't told you everything. Thanks very much indeed.